My name is Bob Hinnrichs, and I was a design engineer. I worked at three companies: Bendix Corporation, Litton Data Systems, and then later at Rockwell International. My first job was at Bendix Corporation, where I was a design engineer doing electrical design work on the Mark 46 homing torpedo for the Navy. This was a torpedo that was dropped into the water by an aircraft. It had a sonar system on it, and that would seek out submarines and then go after them and attack them. And my main job there was developing some of the electronics for that Navy program. I guess I first realized that in the sixth grade. My sixth grade teacher was really a scientist, and he would do all kinds of experiments for the class and introduced us to astronomy. He brought a telescope and we were invited to come back in the evening, and it just fascinated me, looking at the planets and the craters of the moon and all that. And I think that's probably when I decided I wanted to get one way or the other into some branch of science. Well, I think personal skills, you have to, if you want to be an engineer designing stuff, you really need the desire to build things, to make things happen, and to get into some new areas. I think that's really important. It's basically a love of science. Yes, to get into engineering, typically you need a 4-year degree in either, depending on what discipline you're interested in, either in engineering, electronics, or physics, or chemistry, or one of the sciences. Although there are some very good engineers that don't have a degree, that's kind of difficult, and usually they're people that moved up in the industry from some other avocation. But basically you need a 4-year diploma. I think the favorite thing is the challenge of being able to build things. If you're an engineer, you always like problem solving, and to be able to come up with something new that's never been done before, I think that's probably one of the nicest things, or one of the things I enjoyed about engineering anyway. Well, part of the creating something new is a challenge, because sometimes what you do works and sometimes it doesn't work. But that's part of the whole challenge of it. And sometimes being able to work within the boundaries that you're given, the specifications that you have to design to, are difficult. And so there's a lot of challenges, but a lot of rewards as well when you see something working that you've been working on for a long time. Okay, if you're interested in getting into engineering, I think one of the things you could do is get involved with club work. Join a robotics club, join a ham radio club, join an astronomy club. Get involved in science, and you meet other people, and it gives you kind of an idea of what field you might want to go into, because there are a lot of different fields. You can become a design engineer, you can become a test engineer, even you can get involved in marketing. So it's fun to look at a lot of different fields, and so when you decide to concentrate on one to study, then that's a field that you've chosen, and that's a field you're going to enjoy. Well, a typical workday is, typically it's a 40-hour week or 8-hour workday, and it changes depending on what part of the program you're in. Initially, there's a lot of design work, so you're talking to suppliers, finding out what materials are out there, looking at doing various theoretical designs to see what's going to work and what's not going to work, and that occupies almost 100% of your time. And then you get into the we got to build it and check it out phase, and then there's some fabrication. You might build some parts of it, see how your design works, whether it's an electronic design, mechanical design. And then there's a test phase where you test it, and then a manufacturing phase where you might have to support manufacturing. And then finally there can be a field test or supporting your design in the field. So it varies as a program progresses. Average 40 hours, but there are times when you have to work more, especially if you move up the ladder into management positions. Oftentimes in those positions there's quite a bit of travel involved, and so there you're working 24 hours a day if you're on a trip. Sometimes there's some special events that happen that require working overtime, but usually it's a 40-hour a week, 8-hour a day job. Oh, it's growing like crazy because there's all new inventions. If you think back, the Wright brothers had their first flight in 1903, and we didn't, at that time, no one thought we'd be going to the moon in the late 1960s. And I think right now we don't really know where we're going to be with the robotics, with all the new electronics coming out. It's going to be an expanding field, and it's hard to tell where we're headed. Tough to say. Like I said, who would have thought when the Wright brothers flew what was going on? When I went to college, the big computers were the IBMs and the UNIVACs. And now we're in a whole room. We had a separate room just to provide air conditioning for them. Now your cell phone has more computing power than some of those early big computers, so it's an amazing field. Well, that's a tough one because I've been retired for about 15 years, so I can't really give you an accurate starting salary. But one thing to keep in mind, I moved up the management channel when I was working, and a lot of the companies, technical companies, General Motors, companies like that, when they have a president, usually he comes up through the engineering side. So really the opportunities, I think, are pretty unlimited if you're in any kind of a technical company to move up, and then you're talking multi-six-figure income, certainly. And if you're the president or get up into the higher executive branch, sky's the limit. Well, I didn't find anything negative. I enjoyed everything I did and didn't really find anything negative. There can be some frustrations at times. Like I said, if you really come to enjoy doing this design work and your design doesn't work real well, that's a frustration, but it's also a challenge. And one nice thing is typically, particularly for a young engineer, when you first get in there, they usually assign you a buddy, somebody that can guide you along and help you. And so you learn where all the equipment is you need, and you learn the processes. And so I never really found any negatives. It was all something I enjoyed it the entire time. Not laid off that often. It can happen. Most companies, aerospace projects, for example, tend to be 5, 6 years long. So there's usually quite a period there. And usually companies, once they develop a staff, when one project is finished, they look to get another project. So general layoffs are pretty rare, but they can happen. If you have a very large program and that program comes to an end and the company has nothing future to keep the personnel, there's no option but to have a layoff. But I think in the 40 years I was working, I think I saw maybe 2 or 3 layoffs in all those years. Fortunately, I was never a part of a layoff. And the way the industry is expanding, going out and getting another job somewhere else is relatively easy. Usually, if one company loses a project, there's one at another company. So typically, job changing happens quite frequently. Well, engineering background, there's a lot of people that get into, for example, marketing, get into testing. A lot of people like the field testing, where you get out there and talk to the customers. And an engineering background is very useful in all of those fields. And then, of course, there's teaching and university work and then research work. So there's a lot of options for an engineer. Typically, when people move along their career, they either become what's called a design specialist, where you're one of the higher paid designers of a particular specialty, or you get into management, either general management or project management, and those fields are also very, very rewarding. So there's lots of options. Also, there's many fields. You could be a chemical engineer, an electrical engineer, industrial engineer, so there's a lot of options. Well, like I said, the early part of a design job is doing design work. So you're doing the true engineering. Then you have to build whatever, or see, make sure it gets built, whatever you designed, and you test it. So it changes as time goes by, and then you're supporting manufacturing in what they're doing. And when you get into management, a lot of your time is spent going through time cards or doing personnel reviews. So it varies depending on what area you're in. That's why I said some people want to stay in the design area and be specialists. Other people like to get into management. So there's all those opportunities as well. Well, I think engineering is a very rewarding career. I enjoyed it. I got to work on a lot of interesting programs like the Space Shuttle and Space Station, met a lot of astronauts, and I think it's real rewarding to be able to create something and then see it actually in service, and there's a lot of pride that gets developed with that.